I would say even more so take the risks. Just keep going, keep trying. Because I think being outside of your comfort zone is the best place to be. Because when you get comfortable, things get lazy, it gets monotonous, and everything stays the same. Whereas if you're outside of your comfort zone, you're constantly fighting to do better and make yourself better, as well as make things better for the future.
Welcome to the Royal Flush Podcast. My name is John Overy, and I am the VP of Sales here at Royal Flush. In this podcast, we're going to go over the ever-growing state-of-the-art technology of our company here at Royal Flush. More importantly, we're going to have local guests from the local community here in Rhode Island, and ideally cover the 3 I's. We're going to be talking to interesting people who have interesting stories that spark interesting conversation that ideally are phenomenal for you to listen to. In this episode, we have one of my favorite people in the world, and the person I spend most of my time with, my brother-in-law and partner here at Royal Flush, Marc Watson. Marc talks about being a young man coming from Africa, starting as a young plumber working with his dad, and growing into the pipelining company that we know today. So have a listen, like and share. Hope you enjoy the episode. Stay tuned. Marc, welcome back again to the Royal Flush Podcast.
How are you?
This is going to be the Marc Watson origin story, okay?
Okay.
So, like most of our guests, let's start back when you were a child. I know you have an interesting story of coming to America. So tell me what your childhood was like growing up, and tell me one specific memory that really kind of sticks out in your brain.
All right. So as you know, my father and mother immigrated here from South Africa.
Do you have any memories of living there?
I have nothing.
Nothing. How old are you when you came here?
I think I was just about 4 when we got here.
I think it's 4 years old.
So we immigrated here. So obviously Jade's from South Africa as well. We came out here, and obviously my mom and dad started, the plumbing company. My dad was working for Roto-Rooter at the time when he started. And then once he branched out on his own, we obviously saw the success and everything. But I would say one story that sticks out of my mind about my dad opening his own business here was it was Christmas time, and it was Christmas Day, and literally he got a quote-unquote phone call for an emergency job, and he just left. And it was nothing for us. None of us were shocked, nothing like that. And a short time later, maybe an hour or so later, he came home and he actually brought us a puppy. So it was staged, but the pure fact that my dad had just left during Christmas to go to work was just the complete norm in our house. Because my dad, he would always work. He would disappear at our birthday parties. He'd sneak out, go do a quick job, because when they were running that business, when he had the business early on, every call mattered. So literally every phone call that came through, we had to go because you
stopped everything you did.
Stopped it because you didn't know when the next thing was coming. To the point where I can remember as a kid be sitting in church, and my dad had the pager back then, and the pager would go off, and he'd be like, "We gotta go." I can remember my mom would be mortified that we'd have to walk, sneak out of church to go. So definitely growing up, my dad always instilled that, working hard and all that kind of good stuff.
So getting a puppy at Christmas time is your favorite memory?
Probably, yeah. It was probably my favorite memory, and it just ties to my dad and his work ethic. You know what I mean? Growing up, hey, it was completely normal for him to not be there.
Now, were you into sports? What did you like to do as a kid?
So I played soccer when I was really young, and then I played some baseball, and then I got into karate growing up, and I went all the way through and got my black belt in that, so that was awesome.
Okay.
I was really passionate about that from when I first started there. My white belt was turning blue from the uniform because I was going so much. I really love karate. I was teaching there.
What were the ages that you went there?
I think I went there from right around maybe 10 till right around 17. But I was hooked on it. I loved it. I loved the passion in it. I was teaching kids. I was doing their Junior Dragons program there. It was at Rocky Silver's right here in Seekonk. I loved it. I loved the tournaments. I loved, I was doing backflips, breaking concrete, breaking wood, doing all sorts of fun stuff. I really got hooked on that when I was young. I actually chose that over baseball.
Okay.
And then when I got into high school, I really got into swimming. I did really well at that. But yeah, that was pretty much the sports I was into.
So I've known Marc since he was 13 years old, which is kind of crazy.
Very crazy.
And I remember you telling me the story about rollerblading and rollerblades.
Oh, yeah. So I was on rollerblades so much when I was a kid. My mom and dad would have to constantly buy me new wheels because I would wear them out. I would get home from school, they'd be on my feet. And that would be it. And it was I was I was never good at like that aggressive inline skating kind of thing, but like we were just playing roller hockey all the time, and we grew up in that generation where it was car and everybody had to like clear the road to get out of the way.
Yep.
So on rollerblades all the time. Actually, I worked at United Skates
Oh,
here as
yeah.
well. I had the cool referee swag going on, and I was skating around the rink there as well. So
Well, I can't skate, so I'm jealous.
can't
All right.
skimboard either.
So you had a unique but normal childhood. And then you kind of became a young man. You graduated high school and you decided to go to college, right?
Yeah.
So tell me about that experience.
So I decided to go to Johnson and Wales. We had explored other colleges across the country, whatever. I went down to North Carolina, with my parents, and looked. But ultimately, Johnson and Wales was just kind of where I ended up. When I was in classes there during the day, I was like still working for my dad. But then I ended up transferring to the night program because I was like, I can work and make more money and then just go to school at night. And the night crowd is more like adults that were like more there for the education piece. I wasn't really much of like a partier, I guess you'd say, in college. So for me, like working was like I'd rather work and make money. And actually, my good friend Shane, him and I went to high school together. We went to Johnson and Wales together as well. We ended up opening up like a little junk removal business. So we were doing that during the day. So we were trying to do everything. But ultimately, when I went to college because my mom basically like wanted me to go. She wanted me to get a degree.
Yep.
Obviously when you're younger, you butt heads with your dad a lot, and it wasn't the best case scenario when I was younger with me and my dad. We'd kind of get at each other every once in a while because I thought I knew everything and I clearly knew nothing.
Yep.
So my mom wanted me to get that degree, hoping I'd probably end up doing something else.
Yes.
But while I was there, I kind of realized, well, I can use my hands every day and make more money on like a Saturday than people are making all week by getting dirty and doing things people don't want to do. So after I got my associate's degree, I was kind of like, all right, I got something for you, Mom, and I'm all set. And then I came in and worked with my dad.
Yeah. So you officially joined Royal Flush when?
So that would be 2007. So that would be like the summer of 2007.
All right. And tell me what a typical day. So now it's you, your dad. Do you have another helper?
So in the beginning, it was me and my dad and a guy named Jordan. That worked for us forever.
Jordan. Yeah.
He was like one of our longest standing plumbing guys. The big thing was when I'd go to work, I'd work with Jordan all day. And Jordan would say, I'm going to install the sink, you're going to do the faucet if we were on the same job. So it was more like, here, you go and do that. Whereas when I was typical day with my dad, it would be pass me the wrench, pass me the screwdriver. And I never got to actually do anything really because he wanted to just get the jobs done and move on to the next one. So I actually learned more when I wasn't working with my dad.
Yeah.
Because I had to do it with my hands. I mean, I would always watch and learn. Like, I was never just the kid that would just sit back. Like, I always wanted to do more. But I can remember we did everything from excavation work to boilers to bathrooms. I mean, you name it, we were doing it. Drain cleaning, everything.
Yep.
And that day could be 8 or 9 service calls throughout the course of the day. But, everybody loved my dad, loved his accent, always wanted to hear it, never believed that it was I'm actually his son because I don't have the accent or anything, But, it was a typical day for my dad was 8 or 9 phone calls. It was always coffee. It was a milkshake if it was hot out, and it was lunch.
7 meals throughout the day.
7 meals throughout the day, for sure. But, it was always eventful. And him and I would always laugh and joke throughout the day. So it was always definitely one of my favorite things that I ever had in all of this was being able to work alongside my dad.
Yeah, and it was never for good and bad. They weren't really planned days. It was might have something in the morning scheduled, but the phone rang, we're going here, we're going there, we got to go to the supply house, we got to get this.
Yeah.
And we're just reactionary service call business.
Oh, yeah. And, my dad was servicing everybody. So we were at Olive Gardens, we were at Friendly's, we were doing residential. But, yeah, you're right. Like, literally, there were some days where we'd be hanging out at his house and cutting the grass and, laying by the pool because it was hot out. And then the phone rang and, boom, you had to get up and you had to go.
Yep.
But, his days were very inconsistent. Nothing was really planned out unless it was, a bathroom remodel. We got into that.
Yeah.
The boiler installs, I took a liking to those because it was something different. I really got into the wiring side of that, and I was always trying to make things look as neat as possible and everything.
Yeah.
But that was one of those things that just never really took off either.
Yeah. So that's probably a very traditional story for many traditional service guys, right? There's probably a lot of guys that we know in this business that have run great little plumbing companies for 10, 20, 30 years that are the same thing.
Right.
Right? If you're saying, hey, well, what are you doing next week? They couldn't possibly tell you.
Right.
So I think, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but tell me some of the things you loved about working with your dad for that 7-8 year period, and some of the things that you really, really didn't like about working in the traditional serving business with your dad.
Right. So the things I really didn't like was the times. So people call on a Saturday and you'd have to go.
Yep.
Because it was emergency based, and again, you didn't know when that next phone call was going to come. The thing I really liked was the joy and the satisfaction of seeing what you did, and then how the end result was, and then seeing how happy the person was.
You fix a problem instantaneously.
You fix a problem and you solve it.
Yeah.
Back from even like installing new drain lines, like people's sewer lines were completely collapsed, and you were out there. You worked with an excavation company. They would dig the line. You'd install it, but at the end of the day, you knew you had completed like a great job.
Yep.
But yeah, like working with my dad, there wasn't too much that I really hated. I mean, I didn't never mind it getting dirty. I mean, you literally don't even think about it now. I'm sure there was so many days when I wouldn't even wash my hands before I'd eat.
Definitely.
Like just whatever, it was just the norm. But yeah, I mean, it was awesome. I mean, I get to work with my dad every day. So there was days you'd nip off and you'd fish, or you'd nip off, you get some good lunch, and I never paid for lunch. Never, it was my dad. So it was great.
Yep. And then maybe fast forward. So how long did you work with him in the traditional plumbing version of Royal Flush? What was that time frame?
So I mean, realistically, right up until we got the jetter.
Okay, which was when?
2014.
So we're 2006 to 2014.
Yeah, 2007 to 2014. Yeah, so about 7 years. Yeah,
so 7 years.
Yeah.
And so we've heard the story from Jim, but I want to hear the story from your perspective. It's now 2014. You've done this service work.
Right.
And you like it. And I wouldn't say you don't like it, but I know that you were craving something a little bit different.
I was definitely craving something different, and to be honest, I was getting kind of bored, as we'll say, because it got to the point where I could put a water heater in with my eyes closed. I was going out doing that stuff by myself. You put a toilet in, you could put 1,000 toilets in. Like nothing was really rocking my world, we'll say. And I started to notice we were subbing out a lot of jet work to another contractor that we were still really close with today, Paul Anderson.
We had no drain cleaning equipment whatsoever.
We were only snaking drains. That's all we were doing, or replacing. We had a rigid camera, because that's how we would say, you've got roots in your line, we should dig it up, or it's collapsed, we should dig it up and replace it. But we weren't in the market of jetting. So I had started to keep track of how many jobs we were subbing out to Paul Anderson Drain. And I was like, Dad, we're giving a lot of money away. And I started diving into the world, of what jetters are out there, calling up different people. And I'm sure in his podcast we talked about the wet show in Indianapolis.
Yeah.
And he had been to one before in Nashville with my mom, and he had said to me, it'll blow your mind when you see it, right? And I don't even think that even puts words to it.
Yeah.
I can remember going to that show. It's February, it's freezing cold, and I can remember getting there and walking into that show, and my mind was just blown.
Yeah.
And the jetter we ended up buying was actually on display right when you walk into the show, so it was awesome.
Yeah.
And as you know, the one that I had picked out, we went and looked at it. My dad was like, I don't want that one. The welds are terrible. The nuts and bolts are going to fall apart. It looks like junk.
Yep.
And that was, I think in the 20s. And of course, we walked over to the booth at Spartan, and I had known that was like the Cadillac, right? Like that was like like the best one. And that was sitting right around like 45 or 48,000. And my dad was like, this is the best one. If I'm going to pull the trigger, we're going to invest in this.
Yep.
So that moment there, I went ghost white because I was like, this guy's investing this money. And at the time, we weren't making anything.
Yeah, and so, I mean, you didn't have any equipment. What was the most expensive piece of equipment you had at that time?
Probably the rigid camera.
Which was?
In that time, I think we still had the black and white one.
Yep.
So we probably spent $5,000 or $6,000 on the camera. And that was like, whoa.
And you had all the tools you needed, but again, we talked about a traditional plumber, these are just tools you compile over years, a couple $100, but again, there's nothing state of the art, nothing high tech, and nothing $50,000 worth.
No, and like when I tell you I was sick to my stomach.
And how old were you?
So in 2014, God, I would have been 24 maybe?
I can't do that math either.
I don't know.
So $50,000 is a lot of money no matter what, but to a 24-year-old, that's probably might as well have been $1 million.
Especially like at that point there, like I knew my dad was investing in me to do something with it.
Yeah.
Like he was like, you're going to get me the work, we're going to drum it up, we're going to make it work. And like I can literally remember like having lunch with him and like not eating and just being like sick because I'm like, he's investing. And at that time there, that was probably 20% of what we're bringing in for the year.
Yeah.
And that was a number that rocked me. And I was like,
now, were you afraid?
I was definitely afraid at first because I was like, again, it's that risk factor. And I'm like, he's putting this all out there for me. Yep. And I was afraid. My biggest fear was failing. My biggest fear was I had talked this thing up. I had talked up, I can do this. I can get these accounts. Is it going to work? So obviously, as we know, he pulled the trigger on it.
Yep.
And again, that show was the game changer for everything. So if we had done what most people do and order a piece of equipment and it gets delivered to you and you don't see the show, you miss out on a lot. And I will never forget, we walked by the Source One booth, and we sat down and we watched these guys doing a demo installing the pipe patches. And I was like, man, Dad, I think we can handle that. Like, I think if we jet out the roots, we can put these patches in. So, we got the jetter, we had it up and running, we had an awesome training, week with that guy. We got really comfortable with it, and then my dad and I decided, you know what, let's pull the trigger on the patch kit. And that patch kit, Chad Miller came out to do our training from Source One on that. And my dad was saying, he came out there in like $200 jeans, cowboy boots, and we're installing patches and sewer lines. And we spent 2 days with him slinging these patches. He wanted to do them like in a shop in a garage, and we were right out there on the road at customers' houses. And that there was the hook, line, and sinker for me with, all right, well, there's more to this sewer and drain cleaning industry. Yeah. And now we're getting the tip of this iceberg. Let's see what else we can find. So really from there, it was a couple of years. I think maybe it was a year later. Chad had reached out and he said, hey, you really should get into lining because you're one of those guys where you're not going to be a pain for me in the future. So Chad saw something in me and my dad with how we work together in our dynamic that I know that if, in Chad's eyes, if he got us to get into pipelining, we were going to get it like naturally and not really have to work at it and then take off. And we wouldn't be that customer that's constantly having problems and calling him and harassing him. Because, so he's on the technical side of things. So he understood that we could handle it. And then that's when we pulled the trigger. We didn't end up going with a max liner system at first because we were sold on another piece of equipment being this continuous shooter, which as we know, it wasn't, But getting started in that whole side of things, it wasn't easy. It was rocky. Right? So we went out, we invested money in trailers, we were renting air compressors at the time. And we had a big wrap on our trailer and it says, don't dig a yard, with a big X right through an excavator. And our day one of training, we failed underneath the driveway. So we had to dig up the driveway, replace the driveway, and it was like the wind was out of my sails. And again, I'm looking at it like this is me pushing my dad to get into this, and now this isn't working.
Yeah, because if you never explored the jetter, your dad would have been crystal clear happy to keep doing what he was doing because he loved what he did.
Oh, yeah.
That service work was his drug.
Yeah.
We're talking like cocaine in the veins, heroin.
Yeah.
Like that was his drug.
But that's because so my dad's a people person, right? So my dad could convince anybody of anything. And I can remember, just certain things. Like we'd be in a house and a lady would be like, I'm only changing the toilet, I'm not doing anything else. And like that afternoon we were leaving with a contract to remodel a bathroom. And he was passionate about what he did, and that's what he loved. He loved plumbing. He loved doing, service calls. He loved doing remodel. Like, he just loved it.
Yeah.
And if he literally would have been completely content with that, even to this day. He would have been completely happy with that. But for me, it was, I need more. I need more growth. I need something. Something's got to give. Something's got to change.
Yeah. I think in professional, your best attribute is, see, it's interesting to me, you said it, you were obviously fearful of the risk. But I would say now, you are one of the least fearful people I know when it comes to risk. Because I think you've taken those risks and you've realized that, hey, I know when I have a vision and I've done some research, I know what can happen. It's always a risk.
Right.
But I think you've created a little track record for yourself now where sometimes to a detriment, you are willing to take on any challenge. And you are so confident that you can figure it out that 99% of the time you do.
Right.
And I think that's what ultimately you did. You said, you know what, I love this plumbing thing, but I know there's more out there. And getting these new pieces of equipment and getting into this whole new venture was a pretty big risk.
Right.
And then tell me about how it felt when you started to prove to yourself, like, okay, I know I can do this. I think we're onto something here. Tell me, like, was this a couple of years? Give me another timestamp. Tell me when you think you realize, like, hey, I think we've got something here in this pipelining type of stuff.
So I would say it was probably within like the first 6 months to a year of getting into the pipelining where I was like, all right, we got this dialed in. We started to get kind of picky with the jobs we chose and said we could do, shorter shots or all this kind of stuff.
Reduce the risk.
Reduce the risk in it and get super comfortable with it. And it wasn't until really your 5 or 6 real successful jobs under your belt, you're like, oh, I got this. But as we know in that hot water and ambient cure, which is how we were curing that stuff, every time you think you've got it dialed in, something comes up and bites you. You know what I mean? There would be, boiler issues or what have you. But the success is what really just kept propelling us forward. And it was always constantly looking for like the next thing.
Yeah. Let's take a step back from Royal Flush and Professional. We're going to go back to it and spend a whole bunch of the rest of the time in this episode. But tell me about some of your personal side. So, tell me about how you met your wife, and I think there's a really cool story of both your children, but you ended up adopting one of your children. Tell me about that story.
Right. So I met my wife, it'll be 12 years ago now.
Shout out T-Bone, by the way.
And we met through some mutual friends of ours. And, we got together, and it was probably one of the hardest things I've ever experienced. Like, I never in my wildest dreams dreamed that I would meet a girl that already had a child.
Yeah. So tell me, so how old was Trista, and how old was Rylan, your son, when you met him?
God, so 12 years ago, so I would be 24 years old, 23, 24.
Yep.
Trista was roughly the same age, she's only a couple months older than me. And her son, Rylan, was between 6 and 8 months old.
Yep.
I didn't meet him for the first few weeks we were together, kind of just...
Cutest little baby boy in the entire world.
Yeah, it was blue
He's still
eyes.
cute now, Rye, if you're listening. You're still a handsome man. But he was one of the cutest little babies in the
His
world.
blue eyes had you hook, line, and sinker. Yeah. So we wanted to make sure things were serious or whatever. And then, once I got involved with him, it wasn't just a relationship with me and her. It was me, her, and him.
Yeah.
And we were kind of like an entity, which was great.
Yep.
It was like maybe like a year later, we all moved in together. And one thing we never pushed on him, because at certain points his father was still in his life or whatever, we never pushed the dad thing on him. And I was always my Marc. That's how he would refer to me, as his Marc. And then I can remember one day we were in Johnston, and he literally looked at me. I'm going to get a whole emotional because it's my kid. And he was like, "Is my dad home?" And I was like blown away that he called me.
That was the first time you used those words, right?
Yeah. And literally he called me his dad. And I was like, that's incredible.
Yeah.
And like that's when I knew I was doing something right.
How old do you think he was?
He had to be just over a year, maybe a year and a half.
Yep.
We were living in Johnston at the time, and when he said that, like, that hit me. Then I was like, you know what, you're doing something right. You know what I mean? You've got a roof over this kid's head, you got clothes in his back, food in his belly, and everything's good. He's got a structural centered life. So that was definitely like a huge moment for me, and like it was hard bringing him up. Like when I first started dating her and I brought it to my mom and dad, like I was always like, how are people going to react?
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Exactly.
Like,
yep.
Because I wasn't entirely comfortable with it in the beginning. You know what I mean? Like I knew like I cared about him, but like some part of me was always fearful of, will I love him the way that I love my own child?
Absolutely.
And I don't think that ever actually, like I love him because he's my own child, So we got married in 2015.
I don't remember because I was drunk the whole time at the wedding.
No, it was 2016 we got married. And, shortly thereafter we had our own son together, Jackson. And once we had him, I think that was the moment where my wife and I decided, hey, you know what? He's got to have the same last name. So we petitioned for an adoption for him. His father is no longer in the picture. He hasn't seen him really in years anyway. But probably one of my greatest achievements is adopting him. So it was December 21st. I always call it mine and his day.
Yep.
But adopting him, because not only like I wanted him to have the same last name, I wanted everybody in the house to be the same. But like I just wanted to understand like you're mine.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I'm gonna raise you. I'm always gonna be there for you. Always be in your corner. And he was definitely like, it literally is one of the greatest accomplishments I've had.
Yeah.
Is adopting him, making sure he'll always have everything he ever needs. And he's got a little brother, Jackson, which he's got his own little personality. But yeah, so like I have a solid family, And what's nice is my wife Trista, she's been with me since we were at a plumbing company. We were together when I went to the sewer show to buy the jetter. And, she's been with me through the whole growth, and she'll always say to me, this isn't the same company that you started with.
Yeah.
And she wasn't even with me from when I started early. She just knew it at that point. And, it's mind-blowing when you sit down with someone and, like, we talk about growth and expansion and stuff like that at my house all the time about the business and how she's like, geez, years ago you were talking about throwing money around. You were scared to do it. And now it's like, well, I want to buy this and I need this and I got to do this. And it's not even a thought. It's just happened. But she backs me up on all of it. She's she always stands behind me and she tells me sometimes to like level down and like listen to my dad when he's got things to say and stuff like that, but she definitely backs me up on a lot of it, which I'm really lucky with that's at home for that. So.
Yeah, and we joke that of course we want all of our kids to come join and work with us here at Royal Flush, and so obviously Rylan and Jackson have their own unique personalities. We joke that Rye will do risk analysis for us.
Oh yeah.
And Jax will, without a doubt, be on the lining crew, getting his hands dirty every single day.
Oh, yeah, without a doubt. Yeah.
They are very different personalities and specialties and things that they like.
Right.
It's unique that they've grown, obviously they're both yours, but they've grown up in the same house, and they're two very, very different people.
Yeah, yeah. And like Rylan, so like the risk analysis side of things, or Rye is very techie.
Yes.
He's like very advanced with like his computer stuff.
And analytical. Very analytical.
Yes.
Yep.
And I can honestly picture him being in the back of like a TV truck, just, controlling robotics and finding out what needs to be done in the line to fix it and everything like that, and then yelling at Jackson to get in the hole and do his job in the manhole.
Yep.
Like it's a perfect balance, because personally I wouldn't want two kids that have the same, because then that whole clashing and everything like that.
Yep.
And there's a 7-year age gap between the two of them, so it's good, because there'll be different points when they enter the work field. Although I do think Jackson would rather not go to school and go.
Oh, he's ready to go right now.
He's ready to go.
Yeah, ready to go.
Yep.
All right, so then let's dive back into your professional career here with us. And so we've started lining, and we're having success. I'm going to take a little personal spin on this. I approached you and your dad in 2001 to join this company. Tell me what your thoughts.
21.
Yeah, 2021. Sorry,
Yeah.
2020, not 2001. 2021. Tell me what your initial thought was, and when I asked you and told you this is what I want to do.
So I'll take it just a little bit step before that. So you had helped us interview our previous sales guy.
Yep.
He was a great sales guy. He sold us all on what he could offer, right? And in 3 short months, we realized he was all smoke and mirrors, and we didn't get what we wanted. And the wind was out of my sails with that, because I was like, I really want a sales guy. I think it's really going to help drum up business. And my dad is very big, as we know, on like knocking on doors and getting work. So I'll never forget that night. You had texted me and said, hey, let's get together and talk about how to hire a new sales guy. And my gut went straight to, John wants a job. And I don't know why it did.
Yeah.
And that night, my dad was like, I can't make it. So you and
Yeah, of course, Jim canceled.
so you and I met.
Yep.
And the second we got there, you said, I want the job.
Yeah, I said I want to come work for you guys.
Right. And I was like, I would want nothing more than that. But at the time, I was like, I can't afford you. You're coming from a Fortune 500 company. We're not a Fortune 500 company. How's this going to work? And of course, you were like, hey, I just want to be happy. I'm not happy where I am. And to be honest with you, that transition for me was like seamless. And I think the reason why that works so well for us is because we're not doing the same thing. And there's a clear division in our shop.
I call it the Great Wall of China.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a wall for the warehouse and the guys, and there's the wall on the other side of that wall is for like the office and the sales side of things and the marketing side. And that to me, so you've assumed we talk about your VP of sales, but to me, I always refer to you as like the project manager, right? So you handle the day-to-day stuff for me that I don't have to worry about. It's all the paperwork stuff, the stuff I don't want to actually have to do.
Yep.
But again, like without that side of things, I don't know the growth pattern we'd have. I don't think it would be the same.
Yeah.
Because as many hats as I can put on throughout the course of the day, I can't wear all those hats and do them all right. I might be able to do the work, but it'll never turn out with the right result. So having you come in here was like tremendous for me, because it was like, I have somebody that I can trust. And it wasn't a case where my sister was calling me saying, hey, my deadbeat boyfriend, husband needs a job. It was, I knew where you had came from. I knew your success. And obviously I'd grown up with you.
Yeah.
I mean, literally grown up with you in my life. So like having you here was like a no-brainer to me. And I think that making that work was the best move that we've made, here. So
Well, selfishly, I think so too. The reason why I wanted to come was I was ready to transition from my old job. But more importantly, it was one visionary thing and one really weird, simple thing. One was we'd always talked all the time, right? Our families get together, and you and your dad tell me about what's going on. And I heard the excitement of like, we're doing this pipeline and we're growing. So it was really cool, right? I had no interest in working with guys who would just be traditional plumbers. That wouldn't do anything to me. So I'm like, this is cool. And I knew you were getting bigger. But then the second your dad told me he saw this building, was going to purchase it, I knew that was a monumental change. And as weird as it is the 4 walls and the roof of this space I knew would change everything.
Right.
And also selfishly for me, because I'm so confident enough, I knew in the best way possible that you and your dad could no longer run it to where it needed to be.
Right.
And I knew that I could be a huge asset to you guys to let your dad take the next step to retire, because he was ready to be there and he deserved it and he needed to, and to let you thrive at what you're amazing at, is running those jobs and executing the day-to-day. And you couldn't. You physically and possibly could not do all those other things.
Right.
And so I saw this spot for me, and I knew all the things that you could do, and I had my own vision for growth, and I was like, I want to work there.
Right.
Because it's my family, but also because I think there was an amazing opportunity.
Yeah.
And I was right. Obviously, I knew what we could do, and now I'm so crazily excited about what we can do in the future.
Right.
So I know, well, we talk about it all the time, but I don't know if we formalized it, certainly in this setting. I know I have a very specific vision for us. I know your vision is like exactly with me, but I'd like to hear verbally what yours is, what mine is, and I bet you they're going to line up perfectly, but there's probably still some differences.
Right.
So tell me, it is now July 2023. What is your vision for the next year and 5 years, and what would you love to see us accomplish here at Royal Flush?
Wow. So, I mean, obviously, I personally want to add some more people in the sales team. I'm very big on I want to see work scheduled out.
Yep.
Joe is killing it right now with sales. I'd love to see him training up another guy to potentially get that up and running. Some other things I like is like Savvy, from Connecticut. He's got this internal sales team, and I like that because then they're helping produce some calls and stuff like that for the external. But on my end of things, on like the staffing side of things for like my crews, I really would like to have a full division of the crews. I'd really like to see 3, if not 4 different divisions. So we have our prep crew right now, which is Eric and Joe, and they're prepping lines for us, opening up holes, digging, doing descaling and everything. And then Chris and Brandon are crushing it with the lining. But they're also all working together so well. Like the integral movement that we have with those guys is awesome.
Yeah.
I have the excavation division that's really starting to really take off for us. So whether it's an access pit for us or manhole rehabbing, so that side of things I'm really growing. I personally would like to end up hiring an excavator.
Yep.
And potentially a laborer, and having that whole division kind of flourish on his own, and me more or less kind of overseeing things.
Yep.
There's a couple other little things I'd like to dabble in. We're looking right now a new truck that's kind of versatile. We can do different options with. I'd really like to get into some concrete cutting ends, coring, and all that kind of stuff. Just something that's like another niche for us with our guys. But I mean, 5-year vision. I mean, I would love to have to put an addition on this building because we have so much stuff going on. I think that my vision would be just more guys and more work, but not even necessarily more work in terms of volume, more in quantity. So I would love to see us growing and doing bigger, and I'd love to get into mainline. I'd love to do bigger project that for the state.
Yep.
Getting involved in like higher. I love higher risk now.
Yes.
So like I was at so much. I was like risk adverse when we were buying the Jetter, and now I'm like I'm all in.
You want risk.
Oh, absolutely. When the other day we shot that shot underneath the Burger King, it was underneath the main road. 5 years ago, I would have been like sweating and losing sleep, and I don't think I would have done it.
Yep.
But now I'm like, I know that the success I have with my team and my guys and my equipment, I'm like, I want all that.
Yeah.
And I want all the risk. And I think that for me, I want to see more jobs that entail that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why? What are you looking at?
Well, here's my vision. Is we've talked about the vertical integration, right? We want to own every part of it.
Right.
We want to control. We've talked about control a lot. We want to control every aspect of the project. And really, I think it's continuing expanding our brand into other locations. And that is, I think, honestly, I'm off the idea of franchising.
Right.
I love the idea of controlling it and having other locations throughout New England. And I think we can get the Royal Flush brand as popular as, a Roto-Rooter or some of those other name brands that people kind of, associate with the pipe that's broken.
Right.
And then we can have an office in New Hampshire and Boston and on the Cape, in Western Massachusetts and Connecticut. And we can have these flagship locations that have, I know we can't duplicate you, but somebody like you who's an expert in the field, and somebody like me who's running the business side of it, and somebody like Joe who's selling, and we can duplicate and multiply. I know we have a system here that works.
Right.
And
we have a foundation.
And we're still getting better.
Right.
But I know that this system works. And if we can simply multiply this system and process, I know it will work. Think of it as McDonald's.
Right.
Okay, McDonald's started with one location.
Yeah.
And they patented how to make really good, well, at that time, really good cheeseburgers really fast.
Right.
Okay? And they just started, let's make all the locations like this. We know how to line a pipe. We know how to sell the jobs. We know how to convey the value. If we can quantify that to other locations and expand, I think this can be a $50 million company in less than 10 years.
Right.
And I know we're going to take it there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I love that idea, and we talk about control all the time. because to franchise it, you lose a lot of that control. So you're at risk for somebody running your name and not doing it correctly.
Yep.
That's definitely a strong vision. I wouldn't mind seeing that myself. You know what I mean? But it's going to be a lot of work.
Yeah, that's okay. We're willing to take the work. Let's wrap it up with, you're a little bit older now. You're 36, a little bit wiser.
Yeah.
What advice would you have to tell yourself, 20-year-old Marc, who got his associate's degree from Johnson & Wales, is like, you know what, I don't want to do this. I want to work for my dad.
Yeah.
What would you tell yourself now? What would your now self tell 20-year-old Marc for a piece of advice?
I would say even more so, take the risks. That's what I would say. I would say, worry about it after. If an opportunity comes up, take it. So like with the jetter, like don't worry about the risk. It's all going to follow through.
Yeah.
But definitely just keep going, keep trying. And one thing about me, my biggest thing that I always say to people when they ask, hey, what size pipe can you do or anything like that? I've said it time and time again, call me first. I'll assess the situation. I don't care if I have to buy the equipment, rent the equipment, or work with somebody to do it. I'll take all the risks to try it.
Yeah.
Because I think being outside of your comfort zone is the best place to be. Because when you get comfortable, things get lazy, it gets monotonous, and everything stays the same. Whereas if you're outside of your comfort zone, you're constantly fighting to do better and make yourself better, as well as make things better for the future. So like if you can take more risks now and be uncomfortable now, it's all going to pay off for my generation, my kids' generation, everything like that, to really build everything up for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the quote, and one of the things that I would tell myself, I haven't said this, what I would tell myself is don't be afraid. Basically the same thing as
right.
You. That it's a bigger risk, or it should be more fearful not to do it.
Yeah.
The bigger risk is not taking the risk, because you're just going to stay the same.
Yeah.
And if we stay the same, we're dying.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, what is it they say? 100% you miss 100% of the shots you don't take.
Yep.
Yep.
So it's don't be afraid. That 90% of the time you're creating the fear in your head. You're creating irrational fears of the what if. We always say, well, certainly anything can go wrong on any project. But that's like 2 or 3%. Focus on the 97% that could go right. And I'll take 97% any day of the week, because this is life and you're not getting 100% of anything.
Right.
Right?
Exactly.
So don't be afraid. This is our lesson for everybody today. Don't be afraid. Take the risk. It's probably going to work out. And if it doesn't, you're going to learn from it and you're going to be better no matter what.
Absolutely. Yeah. Without a doubt.
All right. We're going to wrap it up from there. We will see you back on here many more times, Marc.
All right.
Thanks for listening. Hope you liked the episode.